Back then, between the 1980s and the early 90s, there were plenty of cars to choose for a bit of fun. However, none were quite like the two we have today. The 1993 Porsche 928 GTS and the 1990 Chevrolet Camaro IROC-Z. Introduced in 1978, the 928 was the German company's first 2+2 sport coupe that had a front-mounted V8. Porsche's goal for the car was to replace the all-famous 911. However, due to financial struggles, the change in the managing director seat, and the popularity of the 911, the 928 ended production in 1995. Kicking off in 1982 would be the General Motors' third generation of the F-body platform. While still using the same Chevy small block, the Camaro was a vast improvement from the second generation, bumping up the horsepower from 165 to 190 or 210, and upgrading from the solid axle rear leaves for coil springs and trailing arms. Within the close time frame these cars were produced, some could say that these cars were in direct competition with each other. While normal consumers would look at these two cars and not know that, the Porsche and Camaro do in fact have their similarities. On a surface level, they're both four-seating, two-door sports coupes despite having rear hatches. They both have front-mounted V8s, so while one is truck-derived, both serve their purpose in giving the driver a remarkable experience. However, that's where the differences come to an end. As of right now, we're here to demonstrate to you how big that difference really is. Welcome to Futura Park. Here, you'll see that it's more than just a racetrack, but a research and development site for automobiles. It showcases a full track for testing lap times, obstacle courses from jumps to rocky roads, slalom courses, and a good amount of garages for many teams to work on their cars. Here, we'll be putting the 928 and Camaro against each other in a time trial. Let's start with the 928 first, as it boasts 345 horsepower. After warming up and familiarizing ourselves with the test lap, it was very apparent that the 928 GTS was by all definitions a sports car. It accelerates quickly thanks to that 5.4-liter V8. It's 200 pounds heavier than the IROC-Z, which does mean that it can stay planted onto the ground much better than a lot of other cars. Though it does tend to showcase a smidge of oversteer, even through high-speed corners. Unlike a 930 Turbo, however, you don't even have to think about how precise you have to correct the car. The 928 GTS is so well tuned that if it slides, you can entrust the car to keep going with your foot planted to the floor. The brakes do an exceptionally well job at slowing the car down for turns, and the wheels provide enough feedback to the driver on what exactly is going on moment by moment. Some of the work is thanks to Porsche's Weissach axle, which allows the rear wheels to toe in upon braking. Of course, all these nice things to say is nothing new to expect from German manufacturers. Just ask Poland. And that was a time of 1:36:33. Now, let's move on to the revamped Z28. See, unlike the 928 GTS, the Camaro IROC-Z had to undergo more practice laps in order to get a clean run in. Third generation F bodies are known for their tail-happy behavior. Just watch an episode of Night Rat. It happens a lot, actually. With that in mind, along with its 5-liter V8 producing 210 horsepower, and yes, weighing lighter than the Porsche, we ended up losing a lot of laps due to snap oversteer. Anytime the rear end kicked even the fewest of inches outwards, a mild bit of countersteering would disrupt the balance of the Camaro and have it spin in the opposite direction of the turn. but trying to lift off the throttle or simply trying to continue through the turn only meant the vehicle would just continue to rotate until it was facing 180 degrees from a second ago. This meant a more conservative and cautious approach when driving the IROC Z. Despite all that though, the lap time was surprising. Only 3 seconds off. And that's coming from a car with 135 less horsepower and inferior handling. You saw how that first bend was messed up. Now that the hard part's over with though, let's move on to some of the smaller details on these cars. Now, looks. Both may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's not hard to love these cars. It just comes down to, well, if you like fish or wedges. And hey, the 928, despite that bulbous rear, still looks pretty good.
Mommy, I think that man has autism.
Yeah, it's fine. Of course, that was the exterior. If you want to prance around in a car of pleasurable performance, you'd also love to sit in a nice cabin. Both these cars have that. The 928's leather interior is reserved. It's a space for the finer of drivers. Everything is conveniently placed for the user, and the center console has been kept relatively simple. There's even a working clock for you. Not to mention the window and convertible controls below the gear lever. There's plenty of space for every passenger. Even the anorexic children that fold in the picnic-like rear seats. There's also a rear hatch. Moving on to the Camaro, it's very apparent it hasn't changed since the 80s, both exterior and interior. Chevrolet, of course, wanted to look futuristic by then, but compared to the 928, a model introduced back in 1978, it looks a little dated. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it at least has style, and is still convenient for the passengers. At least the gauges are still easy to read. It's almost a complete shock when comparing the previous generation Z28 to the IROC Z, because while the IROC Z is supposed to represent the new wave of technology at the time, the 1980 Camaro Z28 feels like the inside of a bar out on Route 66. Of course, that was the point. General Motors wanted to show that they were adapting with times, and given the success of the Camaro in the 1980s, they did a pretty good job. By the way, it gets extra credit for the lighter, I'm just saying. In fact, one of the best examples of this isn't in something like the 928 or IROC Z. Instead, you can find this example in the Camaro Berlinetta. The swivel radio was standard feature on the 84 Berlinetta. It came with a working digital clock to accompany the digital dashboard, with a cassette player and equalizer as optional. And I just want to say, why the fuck did this not come on the Trans Am? Are you kidding? Between American muscle and German engineering, I'll have to go with the Germans. The Porsche 928 is not just a better car here, but one of the best cars I've driven. It's fast, steady, but even then it's still tons of fun. That being said though, I wouldn't say you can just replace everything. With a snappy backside that tests your skills, Porsche 911 remains as Germany's most exhilarating sports car.